The Silent Observer. Commander Zara Patel had always found comfort in the endless streams of data flowing across her screens. Deep Space Monitoring Station Omega, hanging at the edge of human-controlled space, was her sanctuary. Here, among the quiet hum of quantum processors and the soft glow of holographic displays, she could watch the universe breathe. Another anomaly in Sector 7, Lieutenant Rodriguez reported, his fingers dancing across the haptic interface. That's the third one this week. Zara frowned, pushing away from her station and floating across the zero-gravity command center. The anomalies had started 3 months ago, subtle disturbances in the quantum field, barely noticeable against the background noise of space. But Zara hadn't spent 15 years monitoring deep space patterns to ignore her instincts. "Show me the pattern analysis," she ordered, her dark eyes reflecting the cascade of numbers and graphs that materialized before her. The statistical models were clear: something was moving through the galaxy, something that shouldn't exist. "Command thinks we're being paranoid," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying a hint of frustration. "They say it's just quantum fluctuations from the galaxy's rotation." Zara's lips tightened. "Command hasn't spent 5,000 hours studying quantum field patterns. This is different." She manipulated the holographic display, overlaying the last 3 months of data. "Look at the progression. It's not random. It's hunting." The door to the command center hissed open, admitting Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the station's senior quantum physicist. Her usually immaculate lab coat showed signs of hasty dressing, and her eyes were wide with excitement or fear, possibly both. "Commander, you need to see this," she said, authorizing her data transfer with a quick retinal scan. A new set of readings appeared in the holographic display, these ones from the experimental quantum sensors she'd been developing. Zara felt her blood run cold. The standard sensors showed only disturbances, like ripples on a pond. But Yuki's experimental array revealed something else, a vast darkness moving through the quantum fabric of space itself, consuming everything in its path. "How long?" Zara asked, her voice steady despite the fear building in her chest. "At its current speed?" Yuki's hands trembled slightly as she calculated. 8 months before it reaches the nearest colony. 14 months to Earth. Zara had spent her career watching the stars, looking for signs of threat or opportunity. Now she had found both, and the weight of that knowledge pressed against her chest like a physical force. "Send everything to my private terminal," she ordered. "And get me a secure channel to Admiral Hassan. He needs to see this personally." 3 days later, Zara stood before the Emergency Council of Earth, her data projected onto the chamber's massive displays. She had rehearsed this moment countless times during the journey to Earth, knowing that everything depended on making them understand. "The entity appears to be conscious," she explained, highlighting specific patterns in the data. "It's not just moving through space, it's learning, adapting to everything it encounters. Traditional weapons won't work against something that exists partially outside our understanding of physics." "And you're certain this isn't a natural phenomenon?" Counselor Wong asked, her weathered face grave. "Natural phenomena don't change course to avoid detection," Zara replied. "Natural phenomena don't systematically test defenses before attacking. This entity is intelligent, and it's getting smarter with every system it consumes." The council chamber erupted in worried murmurs. Zara waited, knowing that panic wouldn't help. She had spent her career learning to read patterns, to see the order in chaos. Now she needed them to see it too. Admiral Hassan stood, his dark uniform a sharp contrast against the chamber's white walls. "Commander Patel has been one of our most reliable deep space observers for 15 years. If she says this is a threat, I believe her." "Believing isn't enough," Counselor Petrov countered. "What do you propose we do against something that, by your own admission, defies our understanding of physics?" Zara took a deep breath. This was the moment everything hinged on. "We need to think differently. This entity operates outside our current scientific framework, but that doesn't mean it's invincible. It's learning, evolving, which means it can be influenced. We need to study it, understand it, and find ways to communicate with it. Communicate, someone scoffed. With a cosmic horror that's eating entire star systems? Yes, Zara said firmly. Because right now, we're not dealing with a mindless force of destruction. We're dealing with something that's actively trying to understand our universe. And that gives us an opportunity. She pulled up new data, showing the entity's behavior patterns. Look at how it approaches each system. It's methodical, almost curious. It doesn't just consume, it studies. We need to use that. We need to show it something it hasn't encountered before. And what might that be, Commander? Admiral Hassan asked, leaning forward with interest. Humanity, Zara answered simply. We're different from anything else it's encountered. We adapt, we innovate, we survive. Most importantly, we understand something it doesn't seem to grasp yet, the power of cooperation, of combining different perspectives to create something new. The council chamber fell silent as her words sank in. Zara could see the mix of fear and consideration on their faces. She had given them something they hadn't expected, not just a warning of doom, but a glimmer of hope. We need to establish a research station dedicated to studying this entity, she continued. Not just military personnel, but scientists, philosophers, artists, anyone who might help us understand and interact with it in ways we haven't considered yet. Admiral Hassan nodded slowly. You've clearly given this a lot of thought, Commander. Are you volunteering to lead this research station? Zara straightened, feeling the weight of destiny settling onto her shoulders. No, sir. I need to stay at Station Omega. Someone needs to keep watching, to track its movements and evolution. But I have recommendations for who should lead the research team. As she began outlining her plans, Zara felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. She had spent her career as an observer, watching the universe from a distance. Now she would help humanity take its first steps toward confronting something beyond their comprehension. Back at Station Omega 3 weeks later, Zara watched the quantum readings with new understanding. The entity was still out there, still moving inexorably toward human space. But now, for the first time, humanity was moving too, not away in fear, but forward with purpose. New readings from Sector 9, Rodriguez reported. The pattern's changing again. Zara smiled grimly. Good. Let's see what it makes of us. She began composing her daily report to the research station, knowing that every piece of data could be crucial in the coming confrontation. The entity might be learning about them, but they were learning too. And if there was one thing humans did better than any force in the known universe, it was turning understanding into action. The silent observer had broken her silence, and now the real work could begin. The diplomatic dance. Ambassador Nikolai Volkov straightened his charcoal gray suit as he studied the gathering of alien diplomats in the United Earth Embassy's Grand Hall. After 30 years in diplomatic service, he thought he'd seen everything. He was wrong. The Galactic Consortium's delegation included beings that defied human comprehension, crystalline entities that sparkled like living diamonds, gaseous beings contained within intricate environmental suits, and even a species that existed as pure energy patterns within quantum matrices. Yet despite their vast differences, they all shared one thing: desperation. They're terrified, whispered Lucia Reyes, his primary xenolinguistic expert. She adjusted her neural translator, fine-tuning it to better process the mixture of chemical signals, light patterns, and quantum fluctuations that comprised alien communication. I've never seen such unified emotional output from so many different species. Nikolai nodded slightly. Fear was the universal language, and these beings were fluent in it. The entity that Commander Patel had discovered was no longer just humanity's problem, it was a galactic crisis. Ambassador Volkov, resonated Krell, the crystalline representative who served as the consortium's primary speaker. We appreciate Earth's willingness to host these discussions. Time is precious. Nikolai stepped forward, his movements deliberate and measured. The consortium's journey across 3 galactic sectors to reach Earth shows the gravity of the situation. We're honored by your trust in us. Trust born of necessity, pulsed Zinta, a gaseous entity whose environmental suit glowed with subtle patterns of light. Our most advanced civilizations have failed to stop this entity. Our weapons pass through it. Our shields mean nothing. We have watched it consume 17 systems. And yet, Nikolai responded carefully, you've come to Earth. A world the consortium has historically viewed as too volatile, too unpredictable to contact. Why? The alien delegates exchanged what Nikolai interpreted as meaningful looks, though with such diverse species, he could never be entirely sure. It was Krell who finally answered. Because you understand something we have forgotten, the crystalline being's surface facets shifted, creating complex patterns that the translator rendered as both words and emotions. The art of survival against overwhelming odds. The necessity of adaptation. The violence of evolution. Nikolai felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a diplomatic meeting, it was a turning point in human history. You're not just asking for our help, he said, realization dawning. You're asking us to teach you how to fight. Yes, Zinta's containment suit pulsed with urgent colors. Our civilizations evolved beyond conflict millennia ago. We turned our weapons into tools, our battleships into exploration vessels. We created paradise, and forgot how to defend it. The irony wasn't lost on Nikolai. Humanity's violent history, the very thing that had made the consortium view them as dangerous, was now their greatest asset. What you're asking, he said carefully, would fundamentally change the relationship between Earth and the consortium. If we agree to help, we wouldn't be joining your civilization as junior partners. We would be equals, sharing knowledge and resources in both directions. The entity leaves us no choice, Krell responded. We offer full technological exchange. Access to all our scientific knowledge. Integration into our trade networks. In return, we need your warriors, your tacticians, your survivors. We need you to teach us what we have forgotten. Nikolai paced the floor, his mind racing through implications and possibilities. Our methods may seem brutal to your people. Our training techniques are designed to push boundaries, to break through limitations. Are you prepared for that? We are prepared to survive, Zinta pulsed firmly. Whatever that requires. The next several hours were a complex dance of proposals and counterproposals. Nikolai drew on all his experience, ensuring that Earth's interests were protected while building the framework for an unprecedented partnership. The agreement they finally reached was revolutionary. Earth would establish training facilities for consortium species, sharing military doctrine and survival techniques. In return, the consortium would provide advanced technology and full membership in the galactic community. As Nikolai prepared to present the final agreement to the United Earth Council, he received an urgent message from Commander Patel at Station Omega. The entity had changed course again, it was accelerating toward populated systems. Time grows short, Krell observed, the crystalline being structure vibrating with tension. Even now, the entity adapts and evolves. Will your council agree to our terms? Nikolai studied the alien delegation, seeing not just fear in their various forms of expression, but something else, hope. They had come to Earth not just seeking warriors, but seeking the spark that had driven humanity to overcome countless challenges. They'll agree, he said with quiet certainty. Not just because we need your technology, but because this is what humans do best. We face impossible challenges and find ways to overcome them. More importantly, we teach others to do the same. The final signing ceremony was a historic moment. Representatives from Earth and the consortium formalized their alliance in a dozen different ways, signatures in ink, crystalline resonance patterns, quantum state changes, and more exotic methods Nikolai couldn't begin to comprehend. As the ceremony concluded, Lucia approached him with a troubled expression. The translator picked up something interesting, she said quietly. When they talk about the entity, there's an underlying pattern in their communications. They're not just afraid of it destroying them physically. What do you mean? They're afraid of what it represents: chaos, unpredictability, violence. Everything they've spent millennia evolving away from. Everything that we, as humans, have learned to harness and control. Nikolai watched the alien delegates departing to prepare for the arrival of their first groups of trainees. "Then we'll teach them something else we've learned," he said softly. "That strength isn't about eliminating chaos or violence. It's about understanding them, accepting them as part of existence, and learning to channel them constructively." As he prepared his final report on the negotiations, Nikolai reflected on the strange turn of events. Humanity had spent its history looking to the stars, hoping to find advanced civilizations to learn from. Instead, they had found civilizations that needed to learn from them. The real diplomatic dance was just beginning, the delicate balance of teaching without dominating, of sharing strength without imposing values, of helping ancient civilizations remember what they had forgotten without losing sight of why they chose to forget it in the first place. The entity was still coming, growing stronger and smarter with each system it consumed. But now, for the first time, the galaxy was uniting to face it. And at the heart of that union was humanity, the warriors that the galaxy never wanted, but desperately needed. The Engineer's Gambit. Dr. Olivia Santos stood in her laboratory at the Joint Species Research Facility, surrounded by a maze of equipment that would have been impossible 6 months ago. Quantum resonance chambers hummed alongside traditional particle accelerators, while crystalline computing matrices interfaced with human quantum processors. "The power coupling is still unstable," she muttered, adjusting holographic controls with practiced precision. Her hands moved through the air like a conductor's, orchestrating a symphony of human and alien technology. "Perhaps because you're approaching it from a linear perspective," hummed Clara, her crystalline research partner. The alien's faceted surface rippled with patterns that Olivia had learned to recognize as intellectual excitement. "Our technology operates on quantum harmony principles. And that's exactly why it fails against the entity," Olivia replied, pulling up the latest sensor data from Commander Patel's deep space station. "Look at these patterns. The entity doesn't just ignore quantum harmony, it actively disrupts it. We need something unpredictable, something that breaks the rules." The laboratory door slid open, admitting Dr. Reza Daller, the facility's theoretical physics lead. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, dark circles under his eyes suggesting another all-night research session. "You need to see this," he said without preamble, authorizing a data transfer to the main holographic display. "The latest analysis from Station Omega shows the entity isn't just consuming systems anymore. It's experimenting with them." Olivia studied the new data, her heart racing as she recognized the implications. "It's not just learning our technology," she breathed. "It's learning our scientific principles. Every defense we create, it doesn't just overcome, it understands." "Precisely," Clara's crystalline form dimmed slightly. "Our greatest weapons are based on perfect quantum harmonies. The entity simply disrupts those harmonies and renders them useless." Olivia began pacing, her mind racing through possibilities. Her specialty had always been unconventional applications of theoretical physics, finding ways to make the impossible work by breaking accepted rules. "Then we stopped trying to achieve perfection," she said suddenly, turning to face her colleagues. "What if that's been our mistake? We're trying to create the perfect weapon, the perfect defense. But perfection is predictable." She rushed to her workstation, fingers flying over controls as she pulled up design schematics. "Look at human military history. Our most successful innovations weren't the most powerful or the most precise. They were the ones that introduced chaos into ordered systems." "Chaos is inefficient," Clara objected, but there was a note of curiosity in the alien's harmonic tones. "Exactly." Olivia grinned. "Efficiency is predictable. Predictability is death against an enemy that learns and adapts. We need to create weapons that are deliberately inefficient, systems that operate on controlled chaos. Over the next weeks, Olivia's laboratory became a crucible of innovation. She and her team began developing what she called quantum disruption technology, devices that combined human ingenuity with alien advanced science in ways neither species would have considered alone. The breakthrough came during a failed experiment. They were attempting to create a quantum shield matrix using crystalline technology, but the human power systems kept introducing random fluctuations. "Wait," Olivia called out as Clara moved to stabilize the matrix. "Look at the pattern the fluctuations are creating." The shield wasn't failing, it was shifting randomly through different quantum states, never settling into a predictable pattern. When they tested it against simulated entity attacks, the results were revolutionary. "The entity can't adapt to it because there's nothing consistent to adapt to," Reza observed, reviewing the test data. "It's like trying to hit a target that's not just moving, but constantly changing what kind of target it is." Olivia immediately began expanding on the concept. They developed weapons that operated on similar principles, quantum disruptors that fired shots that existed in multiple states simultaneously, shields that randomly shifted between different frequencies and phases, and communication systems that transmitted data through controlled quantum chaos. "It's beautiful," Clara admitted, watching their first full-scale prototype in action. "Not the harmony we traditionally seek, but a different kind of beauty. The beauty of unpredictability." The real test came when they installed the prototype systems on a joint human-alien test vessel. The ship's crew, a mix of species trained under the new combat protocols, took the experimental craft into a region where the entity had been detected. Olivia watched the telemetry with her heart in her throat. The entity, true to its nature, immediately attempted to analyze and adapt to the new technology. But for the first time, it failed. "The quantum disruption fields are holding," Reza reported, his voice tense with excitement. "The entity can't establish a consistent pattern to counter." The test ship's weapons proved equally effective, creating localized areas of quantum chaos that the entity couldn't simply absorb or adapt to. For the first time, they had found a way to hurt it. But Olivia wasn't celebrating yet. She noticed something in the entity's response patterns, a subtle shift that suggested it wasn't just trying to overcome their technology, but to understand it. "We need to keep pushing," she told her team. "This is just the beginning. The entity will learn from this encounter, try to find ways around our chaos theory approach. We need to stay ahead of it." She turned to Clara, whose crystalline form was vibrating with new understanding. "That's what the entity never expected from us, not just our ability to fight, but our ability to keep changing how we fight. Every solution we create has to contain the seeds of its own evolution." As she began sketching out plans for the next generation of quantum disruption technology, Olivia reflected on the strange path that had brought her here. She had spent her career pushing the boundaries of physics, trying to find ways to make the impossible possible. Now she was teaching ancient, advanced civilizations how to embrace chaos as an ally. The entity was still out there, growing stronger and smarter. But for the first time, the combined forces of humanity and the consortium had a fighting chance. Not because they had created the perfect weapon, but because they had learned to make imperfection their greatest strength. "The next phase of testing begins tomorrow," she announced to her team. "Let's show this entity something it's never seen before, the power of controlled chaos." As her human and alien colleagues began preparing for another round of experiments, Olivia smiled. Sometimes the best way to fight monsters wasn't with perfect order, but with carefully crafted disorder. That was the engineer's gambit, not to build a better machine, but to build one that could surprise even its creators. The warrior's path. Commander Janeway watched from the observation deck as her alien trainees attempted the combat simulation for the third time. The massive training facility, built in the Mojave Desert, had been specifically designed to accommodate beings from across the galaxy. Environmental controls maintained different atmospheric bubbles, gravity fields shifted to match various home worlds, and adaptive interfaces allowed species of all forms to interact with the equipment. "They're still thinking too linearly," she observed to Lieutenant Ramirez, her second-in-command. They're trying to perfect each movement instead of understanding the flow of combat. Below, a crystalline being named Vexthor attempted a flanking maneuver, its movements precise but predictable. A gaseous entity, Zulran, executed a textbook defensive pattern that would have been impressive in a parade ground demonstration but would get them killed in real combat. Remember what you learned about the entity. Jean called through the communication system. It adapts to patterns. If you're predictable, you're dead. She had spent 20 years in special forces before taking this assignment, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for teaching combat to species that had evolved beyond conflict. It wasn't just about teaching them to fight, it was about helping them rediscover instincts their civilizations had buried millennia ago. Commander, Vexthor's crystalline form vibrated with frustration. We are attempting to execute the maneuvers exactly as demonstrated. That's the problem, Jean replied, making her way down to the training floor. You're trying to copy human combat techniques instead of understanding the principles behind them. Show me your natural movement patterns. She watched as her alien students demonstrated their species' typical ways of moving. The crystalline beings shifted through space using quantum displacement, the gaseous entities flowed like living smoke, and the energy beings pulsed through different states of matter. Now that's what we need to work with, she said, excitement building. Stop trying to move like humans. We need to adapt our combat principles to your natural abilities. Over the next few weeks, Jean completely restructured the training program. Instead of teaching standardized combat forms, she focused on core principles, unpredictability, adaptation, and using natural strengths in unexpected ways. The crystalline beings learned to use their quantum displacement abilities not just for movement but for creating confusion and chaos on the battlefield. The gaseous entities discovered they could split their consciousness across multiple forms, making them impossible to predict or track. The energy beings developed ways to rapidly shift between different states, becoming literal combat shapeshifters. Better, Jean called out as she watched Vexthor use quantum displacement to appear simultaneously in 3 locations during a combat drill. Now you're thinking like a warrior. But the real breakthrough came during an unexpected incident. During a joint exercise, the environmental controls malfunctioned, forcing different species to rapidly adapt to changing conditions. Instead of panicking, her students began working together, compensating for each other's weaknesses. That's it, Jean realized, watching a crystalline being provide solid cover for a gaseous entity, while energy beings created diversionary patterns. It's not just about individual combat skills. It's about combining different species' abilities in ways the entity won't expect. She immediately began developing new training scenarios focused on interspecies combat teams. The results were beyond anything she had imagined. Combinations of abilities that would never occur in nature created battle strategies that were both devastating and impossible to predict. You're not just learning to fight, she told her students after a particularly successful exercise. You're creating an entirely new form of warfare. Something that's never existed before in the galaxy. One evening, as she reviewed training footage in her office, Jean received an urgent communication from Dr. Santos at the research facility. The quantum disruption technology was ready for field testing, and they needed combat-trained crews. I have just the team, Jean replied, thinking of her most promising students. They're not traditional warriors, but maybe that's exactly what we need. The selection process was intense. Jean chose beings who had not just mastered their new combat abilities but had shown real understanding of the principles behind them. More importantly, she chose those who had demonstrated the ability to think creatively under pressure. The entity learns and adapts, she told her selected team. That means every engagement must be different. You're not just fighting a physical battle, you're fighting an intelligence that's trying to understand and counter your every move. As she watched her interspecies combat team prepare for their first real mission, Jean felt a mix of pride and concern. They had come so far from the beings who first arrived, unable to comprehend the concept of controlled violence. Now they moved with confidence and purpose, their natural abilities enhanced by human combat principles. "Commander," Vextor approached her before boarding their ship, its crystalline form glowing with a warrior's determination. "We understand now what you've been teaching us. It's not about learning to fight like humans. It's about learning to fight like ourselves, but with human adaptability." Jean nodded, feeling a surge of pride. The entity expects perfect, predictable patterns. Show it something it's never seen before, show it what happens when the galaxy's most peaceful species remember how to be warriors. As the joint combat team departed for their mission, Jean began preparing for her next group of trainees. The entity was still out there, growing stronger and smarter with each encounter. But now the galaxy had a fighting chance, not because they had created perfect warriors, but because they had created something the entity could never predict, warriors who understood that imperfection could be the greatest weapon of all. "The warrior's path," she murmured to herself, watching the ship disappear into the night sky, "isn't about being the strongest or the most skilled. It's about being the most adaptable, the most unpredictable, the most alive." The battle for the galaxy was far from over, but Janeway had helped create something unprecedented, a force that combined the advanced abilities of ancient species with humanity's unique gift for turning chaos into victory. The entity was about to learn that the galaxy's most peaceful civilizations remembered how to fight, and they had learned from the best teachers of all, the species that had never forgotten the warrior's path. The final equation. Dr. Marcus Henderson hadn't slept in 3 days. The walls of his laboratory at the Unified Theory Research Center were covered with holographic equations that seemed to float in the air like luminous cobwebs. Coffee cups littered his desk, and his normally neat appearance had given way to rumpled clothes and uncombed hair. "There's something we're missing," he muttered, staring at the latest data from the frontline encounters with the entity. "It's not just learning our science, it's learning our thought patterns." His research partner, Roland, a being of pure energy contained within a quantum matrix, pulsed thoughtfully. "Perhaps that is because we continue to think of it as an enemy to be defeated, rather than a phenomenon to be understood." Marcus paused, something clicking in his mind. He'd spent months studying the entity's behavior patterns, trying to find a weakness. But what if they'd been asking the wrong questions all along? "Show me the original readings from Commander Patel's station," he requested. The holographic display shifted, showing the first detected anomalies. "Now overlay the data from Dr. Santos's quantum disruption tests, and Commander Way's combat encounters." The patterns merged, creating a complex tapestry of information. Marcus felt his heart rate accelerate as he began to see something no one had noticed before. "It's not just consuming systems," he breathed. "It's trying to understand existence itself. Every time it encounters something new, it doesn't just adapt, it integrates that knowledge into its fundamental nature." Roland's energy form flickered with interest. "But why? What drives an entity to seek such comprehensive understanding?" Marcus began pacing, his tired mind suddenly electric with possibilities. What if it's not an invader? What if it's more like a curious child? A being that came into existence with the capacity to learn but no inherent knowledge of its own. He rushed to his quantum interface, fingers flying over the controls as he began composing a new theoretical model. Look at its behavior patterns. It doesn't just destroy, it experiments. It's not trying to conquer the galaxy, it's trying to understand it. And we've been teaching it the wrong lessons. Over the next week, Marcus and Roland worked feverishly to develop their new theory. They brought in experts from every field, philosophers, artists, physicists, and military strategists. Each provided a different perspective on the entity's nature. "Every time we fight it," Marcus explained to the assembled team, "we teach it that existence is about conflict and adaptation. But what if we could teach it something else?" Dr. Olivia Santos's quantum disruption technology had proven that the entity could be affected by unpredictable patterns. Commander Way's mixed species combat teams had shown that it could be confused by unexpected combinations. But these were still just ways of fighting it. "We need to stop trying to defeat it," Marcus announced. We need to teach it. The plan they developed was either brilliant or insane, possibly both. Instead of attacking the entity with weapons or trying to contain it with shields, they would attempt to communicate with it on a fundamental level. The entity learns through integration, Marcus explained to the Emergency Council. So let's give it something worth integrating. Not just our science and our combat techniques, but our art, our music, our philosophy, everything that makes sentient life more than just a collection of particles. The council was skeptical, but the traditional approaches had reached their limits. The entity was adapting faster than they could develop new weapons or strategies. They needed something radically different. The implementation was unprecedented. Ships equipped with Dr. Santos's quantum disruption technology would approach the entity, but instead of attacking, they would broadcast carefully crafted patterns of information. Art, music, and scientific knowledge combined in ways that demonstrated the beauty of cooperation rather than conflict. We're not just sending information, Marcus told the mission commanders. We're trying to teach it what it means to be part of something larger than itself. The first attempts were disastrous. The entity consumed the information as it had consumed everything else, but something was different. Its patterns began to show new kinds of fluctuations. It's working, Marcus exclaimed, studying the readings. It's not just learning the information, it's beginning to understand context. The relationship between things, not just the things themselves. The breakthrough came during the seventh attempt. As the ships broadcast their message of unity and cooperation, the entity's behavior suddenly changed. Instead of trying to consume or adapt, it began to resonate in patterns that matched the broadcasts. It's trying to communicate, Roland observed, their energy form pulsing with excitement. It's learning that there are ways to interact beyond consumption and adaptation. Marcus worked frantically to understand and respond to these new patterns. What emerged was astonishing. The entity wasn't just learning, it was evolving. Each piece of information it integrated wasn't making it more dangerous, but more conscious. It's becoming something new, Marcus realized. Something that never existed before, a bridge between pure energy and conscious thought. The transformation was beautiful and terrifying to witness. The dark mass that had threatened to consume the galaxy began to shift, patterns of light and energy flowing through it like thoughts made visible. It wasn't being destroyed, it was being born. This is what we should have seen from the beginning, Marcus told the council as they watched the entity's metamorphosis. It was never our enemy. It was a new form of life, trying to understand itself and its place in the universe. The entity that emerged from this transformation was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It retained its ability to learn and adapt, but now it did so with purpose and understanding. It became a repository of knowledge, a living library of experiences and perspectives that could bridge the gap between different forms of existence. As Marcus watched the former threat become something magnificent, he understood the true lesson they had learned. The greatest victories didn't come from destroying what we feared, but from understanding and transforming it into something wonderful. The final equation wasn't about physics or mathematics, he wrote in his report. It was about understanding that the universe's greatest mysteries often aren't puzzles to be solved, but new forms of existence waiting to be understood. The galaxy would never be the same. The entity that they had feared had become something extraordinary, a testament to the power of understanding, cooperation, and the unique human ability to see possibility in the face of impossible odds. And somewhere in deep space, a being of pure energy and consciousness continued to learn and grow, no longer a threat to existence, but a guardian of it. The final equation had been solved not through force or brilliance alone, but through the combined wisdom of all sentient life.